Hello, this is your host, Todd Lewis. Tonight, I have a special guest, Deam Esmay, who, in this movie review of The Red Pill, was actually shown in The Red Pill. I'm also joined by Viredae, a colleague of Deam Esmay's. Thanks for showing up, guys. This will be a very interesting conversation.
Hey, thanks for having me. Yeah, everybody knows me online as Max. That's what I usually work under. But you know, since we're talking about Red Pill movie, which was something I was quite involved in, I'm happy to go by Deam Esmay here. You call me whichever one you want.
Did you guys? Hi, everybody. Sorry. Yeah, hi, everybody. My name is Viredae, and I have no relation to the movie at all. But I have known Dean for a very short while now, and I've been interested in the MRM for about like 3 or 4 years now.
Yeah, I don't know if we're exactly colleagues per se, but we've seen seen each other around, and we've chatted a few times, and I think you said you used to listen to my old show with Aaron Pitsy.
Yes, I have.
So what did you think? You saw a Red Pill movie, right? Both of you?
Yes, I did.
Yeah, we both saw it. So since you were already in it, Max, we'll let you go last. Viredae, how about you give us your first impressions on the documentary?
Well, of course, I found it very enjoyable. I can't say I found it very educational, not because there wasn't good material in it, but because this is stuff that I already knew from a long time ago.
Because you'd been around the men's rights, you'd been around the A Voice for Men and the men's rights circles already.
Yes, exactly. But it's nice to see that actually somebody who's not from those circles representing the movement in a pretty good fashion. That's pretty rare, as I believe.
Yeah. Now, some of the stuff was new to me. Some of the stuff I'd already known. One of the things that was interesting, I mean, I kind of knew it was going on, but to see it broken down was the wrongful paternity charges. I thought that was one of the very interesting, and some of the most heartbreaking stories came from that session. Like the one where the guy had 5 kids that weren't his own. He only figured it out by trying to give him a blood transfer, and the blood didn't match up. I mean, can you imagine having 5 kids that you thought you were your kids your whole life, and then you realize all of a sudden around the age of 10 they're not your kids? I mean, that's got to be like.
Well, and at that particular crucial moment too, it's like it's when it rains, it pours, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, you hear about that. That's one of many men's issues that society doesn't like talking about and doesn't like addressing. The fact of the matter is that depending on the law where you're at and everything else, you can get stuck paying for kids you can prove aren't yours. You can get stuck as a parent. Your child, as a teenager, could go out and be named as the father of a child. And if you aren't able to disprove it or aren't able to disprove it fast enough, you as the child's parent may be stuck with child support obligation for more than 18 years. That's just one of many things that's screwed up about our ridiculously favoring social and legal systems.
Yeah. Now there was a lot covered in the documentary. So Viredae, what did you think was maybe the most artfully done, or the most the most artfully done portion of the documentary?
Well, I think I'll be honest. It's kind of a tie between the personal stories of the people in that the Cassie Jaye interviewed, the maker of the movie, and her actual diaries. Because I remember one portion at this beginning where she said like she watched a lecture by Will Ferrell, and I think it was Will Ferrell, and she said like some of the women were like crossing their arms and they looked kind of uncomfortable. And if you pay attention afterwards, she kind of takes that pose a lot, and you can kind of see exactly what she's talking about when she herself does it, because she's thinking about the things the MRM are talking about, and she's like, "Oh, geez."
Oh yeah.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say I liked it also when she was talking to I think his name is Paul Elam. Is that right? Paul Elam.
Elam.
When she was saying, well, what you're saying sounds very reasonable, and then in like her private video diary, she's like, I don't know if he's trying to like trick me or trying to dupe me, but he sounds so reasonable. And I'm like, well, because it is reasonable, you know?
I mean, you kind of have to remember that this is something she's probably heard the exact opposite of her entire life. So it's like suddenly this new information, it sounds reasonable, but it goes against everything I've ever heard.
Yeah, one of the really powerful moments I thought was when she interviewed Aaron Pizzi, the founder of the Chiswick Women's Aid, because Pizzi said that domestic violence is 50-50. It's rather, you know, it's always couched in terms of men abusing women. We see it all the time in the news, in the media. But it was very powerful hearing Aaron Pizzi say, no, I ran these, you know, shelters. And the women there were violent, because violent environment produce violent people, men and women.
I could talk for hours about Aaron Pizzi, and without question, she was one of the best parts of the film to see. Although the truth of the matter is, no offense to Cassie if she's listening, for the most part, you just have to point a camera at Aaron, and she's compelling. She's really good, and her story is very true. She did found the world's first recognized women's battered shelter in the 70s. And she's got a book, by the way, where she talks about how it all got taken from her by political ideologues, basically Marxist feminists. And that has been true ever since. The domestic violence shelters, if you really look into how they run, are very weird and very ideological, and very ideological feminists control a lot of them. Even women who've gotten into those houses that are run by these ideological feminists, a lot of them, when they get out, will tell you that was creepy and weird. And they didn't help me. They were trying to get me to, you know, because they have this whole mentality that, okay, he hit you. We're going to get him in jail. We're going to get you a divorce, and we're going to get you never speaking to him again. And that's like the default operation. And you know, what Aaron or any of the other people I've talked to who are real experts on this will say, yeah, that advice is good for a really small percentage of domestic violence women. It is women who are domestic violence victims. It is the right advice in occasional settings, but I mean, if you talk to Aaron, who's worked with murderers and thieves and rapists, she'll be like, yeah, some are just so dangerous, that's the only thing that makes sense. But that's not most. And she herself, who was seriously abused as a child and had her own violence problem to overcome, which she did, you know, she'll be one of the first to tell you, you know, no. People who stay married even after an abusive, you know, who can overcome their abusive tendencies in a relationship, tend to be happier than those who split up. It's only the, you know, the crazed ones that you want to be given that kind of extreme advice to.
Yeah, I liked it. Again, Aaron Pizzi was interviewed a couple of times, but near the end of the documentary, Cassie Jaye asks her, well, if you're so influential in the women's movement and getting these shelters set up, why does nobody want to talk to you? And she's like, because if I call the problem for what it is, it's no longer a gender issue problem. And that's it.
Right.
That was like one of the key moments of the film, is when she says, if I were allowed to speak, it would no longer be a gender problem. It would be a violence problem.
It is, because women can get very violent. This is very true. This is something built into men and women alike, I think, because we all have this natural urge to protect the female. It's just built into us. It's our nature. But in reality, you know, these are the dirty secrets that don't get told. The best way to get a man to hit a woman is for her to hit him first. But because nobody focuses on that, because of course if the man hits back, he's much more likely to cause serious damage. But there's a certain percentage of women, not all of them of course, but a certain percentage actually know this and take advantage of it. You can see the dynamic in action in this psychotic type of woman who will, you know, poke, prod, slap, punch, spit, kick, and then he finally loses it and wails on her, and she's got a mark and a big smile because she just won.
Yep.
And that's sick. But it happens, and if we can't talk about things like that as adults, we can't talk about domestic violence sensibly.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I think another really good point of the documentary was she opens up with this one article from A Voice for Men, where was it beat your girlfriend in the head week, and then
Dash a Violent Bitch Month.
Oh my God. Oh God, go ahead. Yeah.
And then what happens? So there's all this fake outrage about it. And then about halfway through the film, she says, okay, this is the article was satire, and it was in response to, I think, Salon, which said, did you hit your boyfriend lately? And you realize that, oh my gosh, this was just a satirical article, and there's this massive double standard, and nobody got upset when Salon was talking about girlfriends or wives.
Jezebel.
Jezebel.
It was Jezebel.
Yeah, Jezebel, hitting their significant others. And I'm like, yeah, that was the whole point of the Voice for Men satire, and they just didn't get it.
Can I comment on that? Because that one article has been shoved at me more than any other article that ever appeared on the site. And I wasn't even there when the article was written. And I remember when I read it myself, it disturbed me. It was one of the reasons I thought about not joining A Voice for Men. But, that was a magazine, okay, and it was running as a publication. At its height, we were averaging about 3 articles a day. I mean, we published thousands of articles, and without question, the A Voice for Men philosophy was to be provocative. So even if you look at that particular one article, and you think it was over the top and inappropriate, the main thing I would say is you have a right to that opinion, and you may be right, but once again, you're talking to 1 out of thousands, and if you look at the authors who wrote it and what they were really saying, I'm sorry, the best you can do is say their style wasn't good, because you've otherwise said it exactly right. We had feminists at that time, you're seeing less of it now, but actually reveling in violent, abusive women. Reveling in it, celebrating it, saying, the Jezebel article was entitled, "Have you beat up your boyfriend lately? Because we have." And they had done a survey of all the women working at Jezebel to find out if they'd beaten up their boyfriends too, and most of them had. And it's like, well, that must be an interesting place to go looking for a date.
I'm thinking there's like some. I want to know which one came first. Are the people who go to work at Jezebel turn into that kind of person, or is it just that type of person is attracted to Jezebel?
I don't know. I don't know.
Well, the other thing, speaking about female violence to men, there's this great example. I mean, Humphrey Bogart's own wife was schizoid, and she tried to shoot at him with a pistol. I mean, this stuff can happen, and pretending that another thing that happens a lot, and I think this was brought up with Pizzy, is that women who are abused tend to abuse, people who are abusive abuse people weaker than themselves. So men will abuse weaker men and women will tend to abuse children. And you see a lot of children that are being raised by abusive mothers. Now the women take off their violent impulses are expressed on the children.
In fact, I'll tell you something that's even deeper that's not in the film. And by the way, when I was working with Aaron, we were doing every 2 weeks we were doing a show, and we were interviewing sometimes survivors, but more often we were interviewing experts, scientists, social scientists, people who had actually worked in the business of trying to help survivors and stuff like that. And yeah, bigger people who are abusive tend to pick on littler people, but it goes deeper. Women do most violence upon small children. Women are more likely to murder infants. They're more likely to abandon infants. They're more likely to beat up on, severely injure, or kill children especially under the age of 4. And if you look at that dynamic even further, even if you try and separate it out, so like, well, yeah, but that's because there's more single mothers. No, when you even go in further into that and look into the numbers, a single mother is more likely to do serious damage to a child than a single father. A stepfather is more dangerous. Let me put it this way. Of the 4 people most likely to severely abuse a small child, is the mother, the father, the stepfather, or the stepmother, if there's a stepfather or stepmother, you know, and by step we'll include live-in boyfriends and girlfriends or whatever. Anyway, just statistically as an individual, the mother is still the most, actually the stepmother is the most dangerous. The biological mother is the second. It kind of ties and blurs between the stepmother, the stepfather, and the mother, and the one least likely is the biological father. Fathers are the least violent to their children statistically.
Well, it would make sense that child abuse comes mostly from women because they spend most of the time with the children.
Well, of course it does. And it doesn't mean women are innately more predatory, but this is just all part of the dynamic. And by the way, they beat up on their sons more than their daughters. That's another, just a thing. It's an is. Boys are actually more likely to be physically seriously abused or killed by an adult than girls are.
I'm wondering how much of the fact that fathers are the least likely to abuse their children is because fathers are usually the people who are most aware that they can actually injure somebody when they attack them, and how much of it is just something else.
I think that boys, at least in most environments, grow up roughhousing and fighting and play fighting, and that the play fighting that boys especially engage in, I mean girls do it too, but boys engage in more play fighting. Boys tend to find their own limits, right? I mean, there's very few 7-year-olds who beat another 7-year-old to death, even if they win in a fight. There's an off switch there that we all learn as boys. Girls have less opportunity to develop that. They have less restraint. Therefore, I think that's part of it. And I think how you raise your girls will say a lot, you know. This is vitally important. I don't care what household you live in. It's really important early on to start telling girls not to hit, and especially telling them not to hit boys. Because, I mean, really, I mean, if I had a daughter, we would have had this conversation about 15 times by now, right? Don't hit boys. Don't do that. It's very dangerous to do that, because it is, especially when you get older. And again, this is all red pill stuff to me. It's like once you hear those words, they go, oh yeah, that makes perfect sense. But it's like verboten to say them in the current society.
Yeah, yeah. I think for me, partially because I already heard about him before, but one of the most, I think, interesting characters that she interviewed was Warren Farrell. Now, I first heard of Warren Farrell when I saw on YouTube a vintage episode of him on the Phil Donahue show with, oh, now I can't remember the guy's name. He wrote Sexual Suicide, George Gilder. And they were talking about men's issues from very different perspectives. It was a very interesting conversation. I highly recommend anybody watch. And Farrell, his style is interesting, but his facts, his evidence is just so overwhelming, so rock solid. And I think one of the key parts of the documentary, I think it was when she was interviewing Farrell, but it might have been somebody else. But I know Farrell says that, look, men are they're seen as disposable, right? You go to war, they all get killed, and you know, boo-hoo, we cry, but then they're dead, and we still get to walk away. The children and the women, the workplace fatalities. 93% of workplace fatalities are male. So again, men are overrepresented in that. They're disposable when it comes to that. He brought up the point that with cancer, right? Female breast cancer is far and away over advertised and funded than male prostate cancer. And he goes to all these lists, and I think it's. I mean, when you look at the data, he talks about the wage, the mythical wage gap. He argues that the wage gap is because women value more flexibility in schedule over a lot of money. So they'll take jobs that pay less, but give them more flexibility to be with children or friends or whoever. And men will typically take jobs that work longer hours and more risky, so they pay more.
I have a whole lot of respect for Warren. I'm allowed to call him by first name and all that, but I mean, he's very much a product of the 1970s, and he is very much what I would call a I don't even know if people know what this means anymore, but almost a Phil Donahue 70s liberal. I don't know if that means anything to anybody anymore. But you know, a sort of old school squishy liberal is, I guess, is how you'd put it.
What people would sometimes refer to as a bleeding heart liberal, I guess.
Basically, a liberal that's fair. Because what he's doing is he's taking liberal analysis and applying it to men, whereas most liberals don't do that.
Yeah.
Exactly. And he really has the mind of a scientist, and he approached the problems as a scientist, as a social scientist, which he is one, fully credentialed. I think he did have and still has a tendency to go a little overboard on some things. You know, I think that his idea when he was starting out, and probably when he was, you know, in the 70s, maybe even the 80s and 90s, he let's have the feminist vision to make it a more egalitarian society, but that means, well, he did kind of have social engineering aspects to what he was saying. And I don't think most of those work, right? Because it's like men will learn to be more like women and learn from women, and women will learn from men and learn to be more like men, and we'll all, and as a result, we won't be the same, but we'll all understand each other better. That's not a bad philosophy per se, but the final analysis, I think it's unrealistic, because I think human nature is real, and women are certain ways and men are certain ways, and you can only kind of shape that with social policy a little bit before you start getting into crazy town. Because most girls like being girls, and most boys like being boys, and most people are comfortable with gender differences most of the time. I think the best way, as a religious man even, I see nothing objectionable in anything Warren Farrell ever came up with in terms of pointing out, you know, all the areas in which men do have it tough. He's right about all that. And I think that's something religious men should be hearing more often, because well, whether we admit it or not, we're all infected with this modern narrative that women are oppressed, or women were oppressed, and we need to unoppress them now. It's better now, but 30 years ago, the women were just dogs. Everybody will believe that, right? They'll just believe it. Well, you know, 40 years ago, men used to just routinely beat their women, and they would get away with it because the cops would wink and look the other way. People, I mean,
why would they lie?
And why would they lie? Right. And once you shake your head, because it's like all these feminist statistics. The thing with feminist statistics is that they're usually right, or except they get away with it by just erasing the male figures from the same numbers they're looking at. So they can say this many women experience this and this many women experience that. But then if you go and dig into the male data, you often find a very different picture.
Much like the sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think there was that scene where Paul Elam and Warren Farrell are both in the same room and they're being interviewed by Casey. And I think this is I think for her, as you watch her progression from a feminist to accepting this MRA position, you could almost sense the scales coming off the eyes, to use the biblical analogy, when Warren says, look, women and men each had privileges and responsibilities in the past. And in the past, men had the privilege of being, quote, in charge of, quote, having the power. But they were the ones that died in wars. They were the ones that died in work-related accidents. They were the ones that were expected to go out and sacrifice on a day-to-day basis. Whereas women had the responsibility to stay at home, to cook and have kids, but they had the privilege of avoiding going to war to die on the battlefield. They had the privilege of avoiding having to break their back, you know, in the mines or you know, going on these dangerous sea voyages for trade. And so
might I even point out, I'm sorry to interrupt, but might I even point out they had the privilege to stay home and stay with their kids while the men were doing all that.
That's true too. That's true too. No, you're right. And so basically he says that it's not that there was no such thing called the patriarchy that was oppressing women and by implication men. It's that men and women, life was hard. Men and women were developing society in a very harsh environment, and they pursued a division of labor. that suited their biology most effectively. And those societies that survived are those societies that made these kinds of decisions. And you know, it hits hard on men and it hits hard on women, but it's not that one is getting the raw deal. They're both getting a tough deal. But as Warren says, it's we do it because they love their children. They want to give their children a better life than they had themselves. So the men and the women in these relationships willingly take on these obligations and responsibilities and hardships because they understand that they are laying the foundation. It kind of reminds me, I'm paraphrasing, but that saying by Sam Adams: we learn war today so that our children might learn farming and our grandchildren might learn astronomy. Something like that. And really, that's kind of what Dr. Farrell's talking about. He's talking about that kind of thing. And I think it's almost like scales come off the eyes of the feminist when you see that. You know, I mean, if I had been a feminist, which I never really was, but if I had been, that would have been a very decisive moment in the film.
Yeah, I had been a feminist too, and although it was an earlier generation, I had called myself a feminist for a while, although not anymore. I mean, the scales did fall off my eyes too, because there was, you know, I'm 51 and I've been around a long time, and so has feminism. And, you know, when I was coming up, the feminism just sounded fair and logical to me at one time, you know, and it takes a while before you figure out, well, that's not what's really going on here. That's just not what's really going on here with feminism. When you go, in fact,
I was just going to say, oh, sorry, go ahead, Viredae.
You know, I was just going to say that I didn't exactly call myself a feminist before I found the MRM, but I was kind of like feminist friendly, as one would say. And I did used to see and listen to feminists on the internet a lot. But thankfully, the internet being what it is, it wasn't hard to like follow people and see when they talk about something and then go and turn 180 degrees to completely contradict what they've been preaching 5 minutes ago. So I think I was kind of lucky in that I found this very quickly, and I kind of got disillusioned by it really quickly as well.
I think one of the things that, in my case, that sort of prevented me from becoming a feminist was, on the one hand, whether he would have used those terms or not, my dad was red-pilled. And Christianity and religion in general has a red-pilling effect on people that take it seriously.
Well, I'd like to observe something there. And this is something you know, if you go over to A Voice for Men and Honey Badger Brigade, they're all rabid atheists, secularists, and so they don't appreciate this kind of analysis. In fact, they get weirded out. But I put it to you as a fellow Christian, if you look really carefully, you know, Aaron Pittsey would tell you patriarchy. What's that? It's fathers. And she's not far from wrong. What they're really doing is attacking fathers. But I actually truly think theologically, and you can even if you don't accept the theology, let's just call it cultural. Okay, let's say this. What patriarchy to them really is God the Father.
Exactly. Perfect, Dean. Perfect.
You even often see it that they actually attack the religion itself just to get at their own points.
Oh, they do. They especially attack Christianity. Cassie Jaye has been releasing extra footage on her Patreon. Everybody should go check out her Patreon and on her YouTube channel. And one of them is this interview with the feminist. And do you know who the biggest enemy this feminist was talking about? The Catholic Church. And that's very telling because the things she's saying are like not really things you can lay at the feet of the church, or if you did, you'd be laying them at Christianity in general, and or it's lopsided because it also leaves out all the non-Christians who were part of what she's talking about. There's a definite strain in Christianity and feminism that is undeniably anti-religion, anti-Christian, anti the Jewish religion. And I think it is all easily shown that they're fighting the idea of God the Father in the first place.
Well, exactly. I mean, we also see this a lot in the U.S. press, where they'll focus on what's called the patriarchy movement or the dominionist movement among certain fundamentalist Protestants. It's a very tiny movement, even within Protestant Christianity. and they just make a mountain out of a molehill. I mean, there's only a handful of leaders in the group, and it's very, very small and has really very little influence. They'll try to tie it to Falwell, which is patently ludicrous. I mean, Falwell is your basic middle of the road, center right Christian conservative. He wasn't some sort of theonomist or reactionary that they're painting him as. And these people that do exist are a very tiny minority, and they'll blow away out of proportions. But again, it's this religious angle they have to, because it's this father figure in God himself that they're going after.
I've seen this, in fact. I've seen the fact, too. You'll notice that feminists, okay, like I mentioned here, like on Cassie's footage, she's going after the Catholics. But I've seen this in other places. I saw a conversation with a feminist recently trying to convince a woman to stop being Christian. And she used, you'll appreciate this, Todd, she used Hutterites as her example. And Amish as her example. People don't know the Hutterites and the Amish are pretty closely linked to the, I guess you could say it a little more liberal Mennonites.
Well, actually, I would call them more hardcore conservatives, but they're not liberal Mennonites, but they're related to the Mennonites through theology and practice to a certain degree.
Right, and they often get together, like each other when they get together, from what I understand. They tend to get because a lot of shared theology, a lot of shared ideas. Yeah. Anyway, now this is them demonizing Hutterites, Mennonites, and certain other smaller religious groups as if they abuse and beat their women and oppress their women and won't let their women go to school and won't let their women do this and won't let the women do that. And having no respect for this as a religious community that has chosen these rules, and that if you actually investigate the people in these communities, the story is the same. The women want it this way too. They like it this way. This is an arrangement that makes sense to them. They're free to leave these communities if they want to. They rarely do.
Well, yeah, this gets to a point. John Stossel, in his book Get Out the Shovel, where he debunks a whole load of myths, one of the myths is happiness, and I think it has to do with material possessions. And he talked to leading sociologists and pollsters, and he said, who are the happiest people in the country? And they all said the Amish. And that includes the Amish women. So the happiest people in the country, including the happiest women, are Amish, which by the standard of a modern feminist would be the most repressed, unhealthy, unhappy person imaginable. But she's the happiest.
And she's not oppressed. That's the thing. She's not oppressed. There may be rules that annoy her sometimes, but guess what? You don't need to, people don't see it from the outside, but all you have to do is know human nature or start talking to these people in these religious communities. It's the same everywhere. At home, mama gets what she wants about 90% of the time. That's just how it goes. Get over yourselves. They want to be moms. They want to raise their kids. They want to, live a simple life. They don't want sexuality everywhere in their lives. They have a nice sexual relationship with their husbands. Thank you very much. They're happy. They're healthy. And if you ask them if they want to leave or go get jobs, they'll say no. What more do you need? These women are depressed.
Well, the funny thing is about this, this gets into the false consciousness theory, which they get from Marx. But I remember when I was at college and was taking an American history class, and it was in some New England state, and they had a poll, they took a vote on the women if they wanted the right to vote. And overwhelmingly, the women voted no. And the reason why overwhelmingly women voted no was because they thought politics was dirty, and it was where, men got, it's stuff that probably had to be done, but it was ugly and dirty, and they just didn't want to be a part of that. And so the funny thing is, the referendum on women wanting to vote was that they didn't want to vote. It was like in the 19th century,
It wouldn't surprise me to see that question be opened again. I've seen a number of women these days who are saying maybe we made a mistake there. I'm not proposing anything, but I don't think it would happen. But it's interesting that even if you look at the history of the women's suffrage movement, the biggest critics
there was a lot of opposition from
women.
Our women.
Yeah, women, a lot of women. In fact, some say, I'm not going to hold to this opinion because I don't know, I'm not going to defend it, but some astute observers have said that The suffragettes' antics actually delayed women getting the vote because everybody looked at them and said, "Look at them; they're crazy, hysterical. You don't need them voting." I mean, that was an attitude people, women and men, would express at the time. That those women are crazy. They're neurotic. You don't want to give them the vote. And it was because of the antics of the suffragettes. Now, I don't say the suffragettes were wrong. I'm not even saying that, but the mythology just needs to be punctured. Women have been part of this conversation all along.
On both sides. On both sides.
Yes, women have always been part of this conversation. And that's because you can't design a system where one half control. It literally can't be done. If you tried to design a system where men controlled everything, it would instantly fail. It just, you can't do that. The real dynamic between men and women is give and take. It's love and affection, and it's sometimes fighting and frustration. But it's
even if you actually did manage to make a system like that, I don't think it would just fail. I think it would either fail or there would become a de facto delegation of power to women. That, okay, yes, technically we have all the power, but here have some of the power so we can make things run smoothly. That's probably the only other thing that would happen.
I know we're going to be closing soon. In the next, I don't know, we'll be closing soon, I'm sure. I wanted to get this out. I think it's vitally important that religious people especially see the Red Pill movie. And I mean any religion, okay? I really do. If you're a serious religion that's at least about family. Because the information in the Red Pill movie will make you pause and rethink everything. The movie's truly not trying to tell you that men are the oppressed class throughout all of history. You could construct a narrative that men were the oppressed ones in reality all along if you wanted to do that. But that's not really the message of the film. The message is more like, no, you just look at both sides before you start making your policy recommendations or before you jump to conclusions. And Christianity especially is the religion of brotherly love. Christianity is the religion that teaches you actually are your brother's keeper. And what you'll see when you look at that movie is that especially over the last few decades, we have been failing our brothers. We have been failing men in divorce. We've been failing men in fathering. We've been failing men in education. We've been failing our sons. We've been failing our brothers. And any Christian who finds this out and looks at this information and then just sneers and says, you know, suck it up, loser, stop being a whiner. A Christian who says that reminds me very much of the men on the road who ignored the man who had been beaten. The tale of the Good Samaritan in where was that, Todd?
I don't remember which gospel. Sorry,
but
it
was the tale of the man who was beaten near to death and left in a ditch and dying, and 2 or 3 people, including prominent, intelligent people, a lawyer, a priest, just pretty much walked by and sniffed or said nothing and let go. The Samaritan was the one who did right by him.
In Luke 10. It was Luke 10.
Yeah, and that's a particularly powerful story because the Samaritans were not just an ethnic minority. They were a religious minority too. They had their own divergent Torah that the Jews running the Jews running things at the time didn't like. So they were considered heretics as well as an ethnic minority. They're still around, by the way. Go Google them. They exist. They're a very small group of Jews who has their own divergent Torah that all the other Jews don't accept. But they've been around that long. So this, you know, and that becomes a powerful example because, like, he's not supposed to be the good guy, but he's just a lowly, good-for-nothing Samaritan. But he's the only one who did what he was supposed to do, which was to help the man. And so every time you do that, when you hear about one of these men's rights issues, call them what you want, men's issues, whatever, and you say, suck it up, whiner, you're acting like those hypocrite priests and lawyers who left that man in the ditch.
Yeah. One thing that maybe you could give some clarification on, since you've you know Dr. Farrell a little bit better than most of us. One of the impressions that I was getting, and this may be incorrect, that gave me a little bit of a pause, was the traditional role of male as protector. It seems like he was saying that we need to transcend that in favor of a more egalitarian system. But you see, I don't think, as a religious person, as a Christian, I don't want men to give up their God-given principles of provider and protector. I mean, that's what we were ordained to do. We should be doing those things. Now, taking advantage of male programming, so to speak, to misuse us and abuse us, he does a lot of good job pointing that out. But would that be fair to say he's arguing that we transcend or move beyond that, or is that maybe there wasn't enough context in the interview?
Yeah, I can answer that. It'll be a little bit of a wind-up answer. By the way, you're roboting out a little bit. You might want to, mess with your mic, and I'll just answer your question. Yeah, giving up the idea that males are the protectors of women and children, you'll find some hints of advocating toward that out of Farrell, out of Dr. Warren's work. But that's not going to go anywhere, and it's not going to happen. I mean, it's just not. I've noticed that, since I more or less left the movement, people at the Honey Badger Brigade and A Voice for Men seem much more into that strict egalitarian, no, I'm not dying to protect anybody, blah, blah, blah. See, that's not going to happen for a wide variety of reasons. Integrating women into the U.S. military hasn't worked, at least not the way they've done it. But more to the point, you are fighting nature there. Todd, you used the phrase that's God's design, this is God's purpose for us. That is what traditional religious men believe, and it's what I believe. But okay, let's take the religion out of this. Let's just use completely secular terms, okay? Let's all be atheistic, and let's all say it's evolutionary psychology. Fine, then it's evolutionary psychology. Most societies are structured along these lines, and it's because this is what men most want to do. I think that there's a sickness, you'll see it in certain MRA circles now. They talk about something called gynocentrism theory, and it's a batty theory that a lot of them have developed, that gynocentrism was programmed into us from the Christian and Jewish religions, although some hold out that really blame the Virgin Mary for the whole thing. But it's nonsense. It's just like gynocentrism theory. It's totally postmodern gibberish, and it's not really supportable in history. What's really going on here is more this. Here's how I see the relationship in evolutionary psychology terms. We evolved, the woman is going to need support and help. She just is, especially if she gets pregnant. And so what? Is that just a raw deal for the man? Let me put it to you this way. When a woman becomes pregnant and becomes a mother, she sacrifices massively for that. The baby, if you want to be, a rude person, you say the baby's like a parasite that takes from her body. But anyway, pregnancy is certainly hard on her, especially the more kids she has. She gives from her body, from the breast milk. She gives up a lot of her mobility. She gives up a lot of her personal autonomy and freedom just to have the kids. And in history, it's gotten better now, but really go back only 100 years, let alone 2. And women dying in childbirth was so much higher now. Just becoming a mother was very dangerous. Just consenting to get married and have a man's kids was like, yep, and I may, die because I said yes. And women did have to work hard. They didn't have to plow the fields, but they did, have to do really tough work around the house. And at that time, mama had to do the cooking. And if she didn't do the cooking, people would go hungry. It was a hard scrabble life. Things have gotten much better for women. So much better. They're blind. I hate to use the phrase, but they're blind to their own privilege. They've given up none of the rights they used to have, the privileges they used to have, but they've kept, they've gotten all the new rights. And that's the way of really looking at it. It's unbalanced. It's become unbalanced, and we just look, but in the final analysis, a woman gives up all that to become a mother, right? So I just made it sound like the children are parasitic and just are nailing her down. Ask any woman, especially a woman with 3-4 kids, if she feels she's trapped and dealing with little parasites. No, she has a natural mothering impulse to nurture and be a mother. It's part of her biology. Do men have the same impulse to nurture? I would say to you that they do have the same impulse to nurture. Their impulse is to nurture their children and their children's mother. And if you don't let a man get those nurturing instincts taken care of, he'll go a little loopy. It's just as like it's wrong to tell a woman that it's bad to want to give up her freedom to become a mother. It's wrong to tell a man that he wants to give up his freedom to become a father. You're not giving up your freedom as a father. Being a father is the best thing that ever happened to me. Well, except finding God. But anyway, I wouldn't give it up for the world. Yes, it's a sacrifice, but it's also infinitely rewarding, which is really why we do it and we keep doing it. And that's the other reason I say, you know, we've got to get a respect back for fathers and realize fatherhood is not just responsibility. It's a joy and a responsibility most men are happy to take, especially once they've taken it. Just like the burden of becoming a mother is one that most mothers are overjoyed to have taken, especially if you ask them. Not when the kids have really been pissing them off. Sorry to swear. Not when the kids have been really bad this today, you know, but in general. Ask any woman with 3 kids if she just would feel better if she'd never had them. That won't come out of it.
Sorry to interject, Dean, but I just wanted to say that more than transcending the role of protector and father, I think it would be like a better idea to just simply understand these roles, because even if you don't want, if you're one of those outliers that doesn't want that role, simply understanding the mechanics behind it kind of helps to make things to help things run smoother, even if you're simply want to accept it or not accept it. Either way.
Yeah, and even when you look at the MGTOW, I know there's these MGTOW out there, these men going their own way who say they're never going to be married and they're never going to be with a woman, blah, blah, blah. They seem to think religious people are hot to get them to become fathers and to become husbands and providers. Not really, certainly not in my religious tradition, which is Catholic, and certainly not in a lot of the others. It's considered, you can even go look in the Bible, it's considered perfectly honorable to be an unmarried person, an unmarried man or an unmarried woman. Not everybody is called to be a father. Not everybody is called to be a mother. It's just that if you just look at it and use common sense, you could say most people are. But there's no reason that you have to. There really isn't. There have been great men who've never had a woman.
I was going to say that.
He was never married. You know.
When it comes to these gender roles, you know, even one of the most successful socialist experiments, the Kibbutzim, when they wanted to have a totally flat society, guess what happened? Men worked in the fields, women took care of the kids and cooked. And these are radical socialist anarchists. Even they couldn't get rid of the impulse to do that. Now, in the time that we have left, Dean, do you have any interesting behind-the-scenes tidbits that you might want to share?
Behind-the-scenes tidbits. Oh, well, I got to be careful because, of course, I'm not friends with everybody over there anymore. But you know,
how about Dr. Warren and Mr. Elam? Any behind the scenes about them maybe that would be interesting?
You know, Paul is one of the. Paul Elam is. I already gave some observations on Warren. I'll give you some on Paul. Paul is easily misunderstood. He is a firecracker, no question. He is a narcissist. He'll admit it. He is of an older generation, right? It's not a secret now. He's hit 60. He's technically a Vietnam veteran, although he didn't serve in Vietnam. He served during that era. He's actually a very kind and gracious man, at least when he wants to be. And when he started doing the Voice for Men thing, he, like me and a lot of others, had been familiar with Warren Farrell's work and the work of others going all the way back to the 70s. And Paul had been somewhat involved in what was called the mythopoetic men's movement in the 90s with Robert Bly and them. By the way, I have another observation of that about that for Christians that'll amuse me, that'll amuse people. So remind me to tell it. But I'm going to keep going. He had been involved for a long time, and had been interested in a long time, and had tried to write about men's issues. And he was the one, and I think he was absolutely right, who said, you know what? All these people who talk about this have been really nice. I mean, look at Warren Farrell. One of the things about Warren, I love the guy. I really do. I'd hug him if I saw him now. But sometimes you almost want to, like, Warren, do you ever get mad? Do you have a backbone at all? You know, because he's just so nice. Even when people are mean to him, he's just so gracious. And a lot of these other guys too were like that too. Or if they weren't just gracious, they were like, well, yeah, but what about this? Well, yeah, but what of that? He was the one who said, you have to roar like a lion. And you have to go ahead and offend people's delicate, ladylike sensibilities. You've got to go ahead and get them angry at you. Because it's clear that being nice isn't working. Yelling does sometimes. You may say, no, you should never yell. No, you should never be angry. But even from a Christian perspective, I'd say, you know, Aslan was not a tame lion. Christ
Jesus
was
kicked
often,
the lenders out of the temple.
yes,
Well,
Christ.
And not only that, the feminists would yell and scream, and that's how they got power.
Well, exactly. And the lesson isn't necessarily that you always need to yell and scream. In fact, just talk to the man sometimes. But yeah, he wrote some barn burner articles that even now, actually ask him privately. He'll tell you some of the articles he wrote that were like that, like the Bash a Violent Bitch one. He cringes when he looks at it. You know, but it was meant to a purpose. It was meant specifically to get people riled up and force them to talk about it, whether they liked it or not. And I completely respect that in him. I hadn't seen it. I had been reading about these things for decades. I had been interested in Warren's work back in the 90s, right? But I saw nothing. And that is what he and John Hemling and some of the others, they were the ones who said, you know what? Sometimes you really do got to get up and roar. And yeah, maybe even take chances and say something and then go, okay, I regret saying that. Because we were definitely pushing the envelope. And we succeeded in pushing the envelope. It did change. It did force conversations to happen.
I mean, after all, it helped create this documentary.
It's a very good documentary. And I'll tell you the part that you'll laugh at, though. If you find out about the mythopoetic men's movement, it was this kind of liberal hippy-dippy thing. You look into books like Iron John by Robert Bly and a few others. That movement failed and everybody gave it up. I found out recently from a priest, actually, who was real interested in my men's issues work, that he'd been into these issues back in the 90s, and he'd even been into the mythopoetic men's movement. And you know what he'd tell me? Basically, Robert Bly's career ended when he concluded that the mythopoetic movement had failed because they left out God. And that was the reason.
Well, you mean they kicked him out?
No. Well, the whole movement was kind of dependent on him. And as soon as he started talking about God at all, even a little bit, it was like people just vanished on him and support vanished for him. And he wasn't even necessarily pushing Christianity, just, you know, with no idea of God, this isn't going to work. Because they were all into, like, who's that guy? Robert Campbell. He wrote the Power of Myth.
Oh, yeah, the Hero of 1,000 Faces, Joseph Campbell, I think.
Yeah. They were all into that, and so they were all into exploring men's issues, but only through, like, the idea of mythology and the mythology of the father and all that. But there was nothing grounded in it, so it was all just sentiment and guys sitting around the woods beating drums and saying poems, which there's nothing wrong with that per se, but it didn't go anywhere. Bly concluded God was necessary, and boom, the mainstream media got uninterested in him. A lot of his former liberal hippy-dippy pals didn't even want to talk to him anymore. Not that he turned into a crazy fundy either, but yeah. I'm just going to say, I know we're going to close, and I am rambling, but I'm going to say again, Christians and religious people in general need to see this film more than anybody else, because once you realize the secular political system has fed you all these lies about men and women, and the secular media has fed you all these lies about men and women, it's clear the secular order isn't going to fix these things. So it's going to fall to religious men to rebuild society. And that's okay, because it's fallen upon religious men to rebuild society quite a few times.
Yeah, well, since we are near the end, do you have anything you want to end with, Viredae? I think that was probably your closing statement, Max.
Yeah, just to build on top of what Max said, if you're not familiar with the men's rights movement, I just want to tell you that if you're having like a crisis of faith, or you're not really sure where you are in your faith right now, or even if you are, the things, the facts, the lessons that you could learn from the MRM can actually really help you strengthen your faith, and because it did that for me too.
Me too.
One of the things that really just drove it home was that when I started listening and learning about the nature of men and women and stuff like that, a lot of the things that were being said in religion, and a lot of the nature facts that were being told, that being stated, suddenly clicked, and oh, so this is why we have these kind of rules, because they actually do make sense, even if you have been taught time and again by society, by modern society, that no, you shouldn't act this way. When you learn about these things from the MRM, and you kind of cross-reference it with what you learn from your own religion, it will start making a whole lot of sense.
Yeah. Well, jumping off what you said, Viredae, this reminds me of, I think it was an episode of Star Trek Gen 1, where there was a computer that I think was in a cave, and it was pretending to be a god, and all these people were listening to it, doing what it said. And then Kirk, being the good atheist, so he's not God, and he exposes his computer for a fraud. And then they stop obeying the computer, then they all die, because the computer was telling them how to live on this harsh planet that they didn't know how to, otherwise they wouldn't know how to live on it. The other thing that I would say is that if you look at how Casey is so beautifully exposed the sort of misinformation and disinformation about how men are actually treated, and how women, how these issues transcend just this binary, one gender's bad, one gender's good. Anybody watching this should also take into account that the same liberal media that's lied to you about gender has also lied to you about religion. And there's really no reason to believe they're biased against Jews, Christians, and Muslims any more than you'd believe they're biased against men. And maybe that would be another possible documentary for her to look into. But we're about out of time now, so thanks for coming on, guys. This is Todd Lewis signing off.